This is a story about my mother and my father. My mother passed away unexpectedly in 2006, and it was such a devastating experience for our entire family, especially for my father. The day my mother passed away was the day my father lost the beautiful sparkling in his sapphire blue eyes. My father always enjoyed piddling around outside, vegetable gardens, greenhouses, working on his antique hot rod car, etc. One weekend my husband, now ex-husband, and I moved, and during that move I had managed to catch the flu. On our first day and night in our new home, my father came over around 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. and I was in bed sleeping. My husband woke me up and said, "Your dad is here and he wants to see you." He knew I had the flu, but it was very unusual for my father to just show up out of the blue, especially when it was dark outside. He did not see well enough to drive at night. I got out of bed and went into the living room to see my father to make sure he was okay. Back then, 2009, when we all had interchangeable phones, I had several of them. I'd buy a new phone and the old one would be placed in our cell phone collection. My father told me he had been out working in the yard and had his telephone in his front pocket of his shirt, and he bent over to pick some weeds out of the ground and his cell phone had fallen into a bucket of water. I asked him if he had taken the SIM card out and soaked both the SIM card and the phone itself in rice. He said he did, but it was too soon for the phone to dry, or it may never dry, making it useless. He asked me if I could get one of my phones and put his SIM card in it so he would have a phone. He had the landline disconnected shortly after my mother died. I was feeling so ill with the flu, and since we had just moved and I had no idea where our cell phone collection box was, I told him that he would be fine for one night without a phone and I would get him another phone first thing in the morning. He agreed, saying I can go one night without a phone. I gave him an air hug, since I was contagious, told him I loved him, and I went back to bed and he went home. About 6 hours later, it was about 1 a.m., I was woken by my mother's voice. I was not dreaming, so I didn't see her, but I heard her voice and she said, "Get your father a phone." I felt it may have been a dream. It may have been that I had a high fever, but I disregarded hearing her voice, thinking I was just too out of it from cold and flu medications and sleeping aids. About 2 minutes later, I heard my mother again say, "Get your father a phone." This time her tone was not very sweet, it was louder and more demanding. I sat up in bed so fast that it woke my husband up. I got out of bed looking for the box of cell phones. My husband asked me why was I looking for a phone when I told my father that I would get him a new cell phone the following morning. I didn't tell my husband that my mother demanded I get my father a phone, that she was basically yelling at me from beyond the grave. He would have thought I was crazy. I found 3 phones that I knew would work with my father's SIM card. I got in my car and my husband insisted on going with me. I don't know why really. I unlocked my father's front door. He was sound asleep in the recliner in his living room. He woke when he heard his front door open and hearing me say, "Hey, Dad." He was curious as to why I was over there so late and why was I bringing a phone to him when I said I was getting him a phone the following morning. I didn't tell my father about my mother either. I just told him I didn't feel comfortable knowing he did not have a phone, especially if there was an emergency. Anyway, I got one of the phones working with his SIM card and plugged it into the charger. Around 3:30 a.m., my father called me and said, "Julie, I'm not feeling so well." I woke up vomiting and I have a little pain in my lower abdomen. When my father says he is having a little pain, that means he's actually having extreme pain. He had a high tolerance for pain. I got him to the hospital within 30 minutes, and within 2 hours of being at there, they admitted him. His intestines had twisted and what he was throwing up was bile. He was just a few hours away from becoming septic. My mother, from the grave, saved my father's life that night. I finally did tell him about Mom demanding that I get a phone to him immediately. When I told him, he cried, and he was not a man that cried much. Just wanted to share this with all who reads it. It's not a haunting or anything scary, and I don't think I would classify this as paranormal. But it was my mother coming to me in order to save my father's life.